everyone. My name is Theresa and I will be talking about some important terms and terminologies regarding transactional distance and independent study. According to Michael Graham Moore, an independent study is any educational program in which the learning takes place separate in time and place from the teacher, and in which the learner has an influence at least equal to the teacher in determining goals, resources, and evaluation decisions. It is also equally important to remember that intrinsic motivation plays a vital role in an independent study. Desi and Ryan pointed out that the need for autonomy, relatedness, and competence must all be supported. In addition, intrinsically motivated students must feel in control of the challenges that they will encounter in the learning process. In this endeavor, students must see the essence of learning a certain concept as social beings. Now, let us talk about transactional distance. Transactional distance is the gap between the understanding of the teacher and the learner. To bridge this gap in distance education, it is necessary to take into consideration the three constituents of transactional distance. What are those three constituents? First, we have structure. It is otherwise known as lessons, which are well-planned, well-crafted, and organized learning materials. Next, we have dialogue. In the teaching and learning process, communication is essential. It is an interaction between the teacher and learners. It could also be an interaction among learners taking a particular course, and it could also be an interaction of the learner to the learning materials. Finally, the learner autonomy. It is the ability of the students in the program to manage their engagement in learning the teaching instruction provided. It is the learner's potential to facilitate their own learning. How will learners achieve autonomy? It is important to take note of the term control in the learning process. Students, in order to achieve autonomy, must learn how to determine what to learn and how to learn, because this greatly influences them in the success of their education process.
Student autonomy in distance education has both its pros and cons. Let's start with the disadvantages. Autonomous learners are more likely to overlook certain guidelines or even schedules set by the distance education institution and unintentionally neglect to fulfill some student obligations or comply with certain requirements on time. This could lead to these learners lagging behind or having to drop courses. Ultimately, this leads to non-completion. This, of course, is a waste of time and resources, not only of the learner, but of the learning institution as well. Autonomous learners, while preoccupied with their independence and self-reliance, may miss out on important aspects of distance learning, which is the interaction and communication that should take place between learners and instructors and amongst fellow learners. Of course, learning autonomy has its advantages as well. Autonomous learners are most likely to take on a more proactive versus a passive position towards their learning. This means that there is more initiative exerted in assessing the learning situation and identifying where they stand in this situation, as well as what their needs are. Because learners are more empowered to make their own decisions and choices, this also fosters a more genuine interest in the studies they pursue. For autonomous learners, it is also easier to identify what they want, what their individual learning goals are, and what they need to do to achieve those specific goals. Autonomous learners also tend to be more aware of their individual strengths as well as key areas of improvement, which in turn makes it easier to determine what adjustments are necessary to achieve learning success.
My role as an educator an art educator to be more specific, in general has not changed with the shift to distant education. Basically, it is still the same to serve as a resource person to provide information, to cascade knowledge, as a support person to assist the students in learning, may it be in the role of being a leader, a coach, or even as a counselor. Most especially as a mentor, wherein we nurture the students to have the desire to excel in their field of specialization, inculcating in them not only the value of hard work, commitment, and dedication, but more importantly, the value of service. Serving not only their personal interests, but that also of their community and the country. However, what has drastically changed is how these are cascaded to the students, from the traditional face-to-face situation to the virtual class setup. This is the area wherein I think the students are affected most. The isolation, the lack of social interaction, I sense a strong longing for students to socially interact among each others and with their teachers as well. Though theoretically this can be done, however, the absence of actual physical interaction and collaboration makes the experience less engaging and less immersive.
Well, based on my experience, creating e-learning materials for adults is easier compared to creating online e-learning materials for children
Mm-hmm.
or for students. That is because adults who are already working in the company um, are independent
Mm-hmm.
or autonomous. So basically, they can take the online courses by themselves
Mm-hmm.
or with very minimal supervision from an instructor or facilitator. Well, that's one of the key aspects in creating an online course for adults. So basically, we have to make the course engaging so that they won't lose interest while taking up the course. So one of the things that we implement or are accepted globally
Mm-hmm.
as a best practice is to include interactivities.
Mm-hmm.
So these interactivities involve um, activities that we do in real life,
Mm-hmm.
such as games or trivias and so on. And
Mm-hmm.
then we just convert it into a digital format so that users can take the interactivity on their own and they will engage with the course by themselves. Um, I can attest that it is very costly.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons is because there are several individuals or professionals that are required to complete one course, and it really requires a team. But there are times when, for example, in my experience, I have created an online course from ground up, meaning the client gave me the content and then everything else I do on my own.
Mm-hmm.
It's still costly, yes, but it's more time consuming in that kind of setup.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it is developing an online course is very time consuming and costly.
Good day, Miss Peachy. Can you please introduce yourself?
I am Precious Stella, or Peachy for short. I am a member of the elementary department faculty.
How many years are you in the institution already?
I am currently in my third year in the Catholic school in Cavite.
So, Miss Peachy, I have few questions for you regarding the distance education that we are currently experiencing in our educational system nowadays. So, my first question is, how often do you interact with your learners?
For the last school year, we have a once a week synchronous class discussion, and the rest is a synchronous session where the kids work their work on their modules.
Okay. So my next question is, in a distance learning environment, how do you manage to have a personal interaction with your learners? And what
One,
media or application do you use to communicate with them?
Once a week, we have homeroom kamustahan sessions where we have or we follow up on the students. During this, we are asking on how well they are doing, what are the difficulties that they encounter. On doing this, we use the Zoom meeting as the video conferencing application to communicate with them.
Why is it important to have an exchange of dialogue with your students?
In spite of distance education or distance, students should still feel that teachers care for them. To make this possible, we should have time to communicate with them. As teachers, we should always answer all their concerns anytime our students need us.
Are there limiting factors in technology that greatly affects the delivery of your lesson in the current setup that is conducting lessons at a distance?
The most biggest problem for us is the internet connection. Not all students have stable internet connections and they do not have an appropriate device to use on their distance learning. We always have difficulties whenever we have internet connection problems since this is unpredictable.
It is very unpredictable. What are the challenges that you encountered when you are delivering lessons online?
Encouraging student interaction is very challenging with our every class discussions. It is very hard to make them participate in our class discussions, maybe because they cannot feel the classroom environment just like in the face-to-face classes. They may not feel the same excitement that they feel just like before.
Thus, having a well-planned and well-designed learning guide aid in the productivity and positive outcome of your lesson.
Yes, it somehow helps the teacher because it makes the flow of the lesson smooth, but it doesn't guarantee that this will have a positive outcome of the lesson. Because in distance education, the interaction of the students during online discussion affects the success of the online discussion. In distance education, interaction between the students and the teacher is very important because if the students participate very well in online discussions, this shows that the teacher is successful in planning the lesson.
So, are you taking up master's degree now?
Yes, I am also a student of the University of the Philippines Open University and also taking up Master of Distance Education.
So, I have few questions for you as a student. So, first, how often do you interact with your professor?
We do not have synchronous sessions, but we do have asynchronous sessions using the online or platform used by the university.
In a distance environment, how do you manage to have a personal interaction with your professor? And what media or application do you use to communicate with them?
For the last what they call it, trimester, our professor used mainly the online or the learning management system of the school. But if we need to communicate with her, we use email as the main communication platform.
Mm-hmm. Why is it important to have an exchange of dialogue with your professor?
It is very important because as for the professors, they also want to know the status of every student. So as a student, it is also our responsibility to communicate with them. If we have problems or difficulties and that are we are encountering during the span of studying or the trimester, we should also we should tell them or inform them about it so they can understand the situation of every student.
Okay, my last question for you as a student. What are the challenges that you encountered when you are having lessons online?
For me, time management is the biggest challenge because I am also working and studying at the same time. We have tasks to do at work, also tasks as a student. So I should also learn to manage my time well so I can balance both.
Last question. Do you have any motivation na pwede mong ibigay para sa students as a DE?
Motivation is everything, or we can complete this all. So lahat tayo makakatapos. Yun lang. Matapos din natin 'to. Kailangan lang natin tapusin dapat.
Good afternoon, Miss Aliyah. Can you please introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, Ms. Roan. I am Alia P. Marbella. Third year. I'm currently third year student from De La Salle University, Dasmariñas, and I'm taking Bachelor of Special Needs Education.
Okay, I have few questions about your interaction with your teacher or your professor. So my first question is, how often do you interact with your professors?
If there's a need to, pag if I need to ask something, kapag hindi ako naintindihan sa lessons, especially now, ngayong online, mas kailangan yung interaction. So, hindi talaga ako nag-hesitate kapag hindi ko talaga naintindihan, i-message ko talaga yung prof ko. Especially sa mga assessment.
So hindi kayo hindi yung everyday ang meeting ninyo with your professors?
Hindi po.
Parang kung meron lang discussion na hindi kayo naintindihan, saka lang sila magse-set ng meeting for you sa block ninyo?
Mag-aano po sila meeting, pero hindi every week. Hindi po every week na may meeting.
Okay.
Sila po mag-meet.
So my second question is, in a distance learning environment, how do you manage to have a personal interaction with your professor? What media or application do you use to communicate with them?
Madalas para professional sa school book po kami nakikipag-communicate. Tapos pag hindi sila na sumasagot pa agad sa school book and kailangan na po na talaga nung sagot, mini-message ko na po sila sa Messenger. Ang pinaka-first po talaga sa akin is school book para in a professional way po talaga.
So next one is, why is it important to have an exchange of dialogue with your professor?
It is very important kasi po, medyo mahirap magkaintindihan po ngayong, lalo na ngayong online class. And yung lalo na sa pagbibigay po nila ng assessment, dapat minsan kasi may instruction na hindi masyadong malinaw. Syempre, assessment yon kailangan yung ipapasa mo is yung nakaayon sa kung anong gusto nila, sa instruction nila. Kaya kailangan talaga na makipag-interact sa mga professor. So, kailangan mo talagang tanggalin yung hiya mo, para makausap yung prof mo. Mababait naman po sila. Kaya, okay lang.
Okay. So my last question, what are the challenges that you encountered when you are having lessons online?
Madami po talaga.
Pwede bang paki-enumerate po?
First, yung given naman po yung internet connection, lalo na po naging tag-ulan pa. Yung gadgets, minsan hindi ko po alam kung saang device ako. Lalo na yung dati ko pong laptop, sobrang hindi kaya ng makipag-zoom kasi lag po talaga. So, kailangan ko sa cellphone. So, pag sa cellphone naman, mabilis malobat kapag nakikipag-video call. Kaya, yun talaga yung sumunod na saka pangatlo, yung minsan parang wala ka sa mood.
Walang motivation.
Walang motivation po talaga. Kasi yung radiation sa gadgets, parang everyday, parang halos dito na ako gigising ako, nakaharap sa gadgets. Kaya parang sakit sa ulo. Kaya doon talaga yung parang, doon ka napapagod, doon ka nasi-stress yung sa kakaharap sa gadgets.
Totoo, nakakapagod naman talagang humarap sa gadgets. So, yan lang. Thank you for answering few of my questions about online interaction with your teachers. There are a few types of interaction that was used during the transactional distance. The learner-to-learner, which is very useful in the present educational system, where the students were able to communicate with their classmates. The second is the learner-to-teacher interaction, where the students that was interviewed used to have interaction and clarifications with their teacher using different platforms or learning management system. According to Moore 1977, deliberate learning can be without teaching. And if indeed a learner can establish objectives and achieve them using resources or products prepared by another, and if he can evaluate his achievement, a learning program without teaching will occur. Also, according to the graph of the transactional distance, as it is increases, the dialogue becomes lesser for the teacher and learner. While the structure increases, such as the programs, lessons, and materials, the transactional distance also increases. The first interviewee is an e-learning specialist in a finance company that is in charge with preparing learning materials for adult learners in their company. He prepares self-paced training that is characterized by less dialogue and more structure. In this case, the transactional distance is greater and learners are expected to be more autonomous. The second interviewee is an elementary teacher. She is in charge of students in the elementary level. In this situation, it was expected of her to have more dialogue with her students so that her students would feel a sense of belongingness. Her lessons must also have lesser structure, meaning the lesson materials should not be too complex for young learners. And the third interviewee is a college student. In her situation, there is less dialogue between her and her instructor. In addition, since she is in a tertiary level, her lesson material is highly structured. Therefore, there is a high transactional distance in this scenario. Students just like her must exercise more autonomy since they have less supervision from the teacher. Mainly, the learner autonomy where the students can handle their time and tasks with lesser communication or interaction with the teacher. To sum it up, if there is more dialogue and less structure, the lesser transactional distance will be.